networks. So the topic and idea of today's panel discussion, if we talk in precisely, sounds like Ukraine and Switzerland and at 30 getting stronger together, because this event is about 30 years of the independence of Ukraine and 30 years of the Swiss-Ukrainian friendship. And today we'll talk about these relations in a breakdown. So I'm very glad to welcome our speakers for today. The first one of them is Mr. Artem Rybchenko, Ambassador of Ukraine to the Swiss Confederation. Good afternoon, Mr. Ripchenko.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for this invitation. My big pleasure to be on this online platform, and I will be ready to inform shortly about the current situation and when we have started our bilateral relations. And of course, I'll be ready to answer and discuss the followings. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Mr. Dmytro Sidenko, President of the Ukraine-Swiss Business Association. Good afternoon, Mr. Sidenko.
Good afternoon, all. I'm glad to be here with you, and I represent our business platform, our business association between Ukraine and Swiss, which together with our embassy of Ukraine in Switzerland, we are trying to build the bridge between two economies. And of course, we involving every day, every week, more and more participants to our platform, because the main target, of course, the economy drives the diplomacy, I think, not other way. And our main target is to open Ukraine as a future economical leader and geopolitical leader of East Europe, who will take in next 10 years the place what should belong to us. And of course, Switzerland is one of the best partner of Ukraine in the European community. Switzerland support a lot of projects in Ukraine, and I hope today we will speak about this. And we are open to everyone who support this two-way road between our country. Thank you.
Thank you for such an introduction. Our third and last speaker for today is the CEO of ADASTRA think tank from Ukraine, Mr. Viktor Karvatskyy. Good afternoon, Mr. Karvatskyy.
Yeah, good afternoon, dear speaker. Good afternoon, dear honorary ambassador, dear all the audience following us on Zoom, on our social platform in Facebook. I'm delighted to speak with you at this panel, because our think tank is keen to develop the chain of partnership, international partnership of Ukraine in Europe and beyond Europe. And we are deeply convinced that Switzerland and Ukraine-Swiss relations can be brought to a more deep, a comprehensive level of cooperation. And we totally support the idea of making more steps towards bringing it to a higher level.
Thank you for the introduction. So, Mr. Honorary Ambassador, Mr. President of USBA, and Mr. CEO of a think tank, let's start our today's conversation from the introductory question. Mr. Ambassador already mentioned that he wanted to give us an insight on the background of the relations between Ukraine and Switzerland, on their brief history, and on how they developed to the level that they have at the moment. So, Mr. Ambassador, can you please give us that brief introduction to the relations and just evaluate their future prospects in a few sentences, if you are able?
Of course, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity. First of all, last year we have celebrated 100 years of our first diplomatic relations when the Ukrainian National Republic was acting as an independent diplomatic object. But if we talk about today's history, modern history, that I have to admit that Switzerland was one of the first countries worldwide which has recognized independence of Ukraine, which took place officially on the 23rd of December 1991. So this year we celebrate actually 30 years since the year as recognition of our independence by our Swiss partners. Next year we will celebrate 30 years of establishment of diplomatic relations between our two countries, which happened on the 4th of February 1992. And since then, actually, our two diplomatic missions were launched in both capitals, in Switzerland in Bern and in Kiev, capital of Ukraine. And since then, we're building our strong, really friendly partnership relations. Talking about step by step creating our documentary base, I have to admit that it was in different spheres. First of all, it was this, as we call, must-have package with all the first countries and first steps which were taken by Ukraine, by our capital, and other capitals worldwide. And today we have to announce and admit that it was really done perfectly for really running a fruitful relationship between our two countries. Today we have over 30 different acts that really help us to have our diplomatic relations focused on economic relations. As we know that economy is one of the priority tasks of any country, and in this case we have very good results. How do we build our work? You ask more questions, we answer, or should I go on for what shortly I can say about maybe this last period of our bilateral relations?
I think that the conversation will move in the following order. So I will ask the questions and I will mention which speakers will have to answer to that question. But I would like to hear your short summary on the current state of the relations between these two states, and later our two other speakers will add the information if they want to. So the floor is still been yours, Mr. Ripchenko.
Okay, thank you. So let's have a little bit step back to 2020, which was a very important year for our bilateral relations. First of all, the first ever state visit of the president of Switzerland took place last July. It was the first ever visit of the Swiss president in our bilateral relations, and has been a state visit, which is the highest possible visit by the protocol of our country. Back in 2014, President Pukalte, Swiss president, also had visited our capital, but he was at that time heading the OCE mission, and he was representing not Switzerland but the OCE. And actually this was very important for Ukraine when the SMM group was created, and it's still one of the mechanisms which is used to support our situation in the east part of our country. Also, the speaker of our parliament, Mr. Rybchenko, was here in Bern with an official visit, which took place first time in last more than 10 years. So we really working actively on also our parliamentary collaboration. Last year, actually 1.5 years ago, soon it will be 2 years, as the new parliaments were in force, both in Switzerland and Ukraine. So we're working on the active collaboration in the level of friendship groups of both countries, parliamentary friendship groups. This is one of the most important mechanisms if we talk about parliamentary cooperation. And of course, I have to also underline that financial issue was on the top of the list after the visit of Madame President Sumaruga last year, and during the bilateral meeting of two presidents of our countries, financial aspect was in the center. And already in September, our Ministry of Finance, Sergei Marchenko, was here in Bern with his official visit. And he has met with several other ministers, especially the Ministry of Finance of Switzerland. And we know that Switzerland is famous not only for chocolate and watches, also for its strong and credible financial system. Also, he participated in the Swiss Economic Forum, which is one of the main and most important economic and financial events here in Europe and in Switzerland. Also, the Deputy Minister of Economy was visiting Switzerland, and I have to remind, this is 2020, the really very active period of lockdowns everywhere in Europe, in the world, and it was a big task to still keep the visits, keep the official part of our relationship, and we were just moving in between of the raindrops, as we say, to keep the visits and keep the so important bilateral meetings. Of course, this year will be also fruitful, as we remember that Ukraine celebrates its 30 years of independence. This is a very special year for our country. Also 25 years as we celebrate the day of the Constitution of Ukraine. I have to shortly stop on the very important initiative from our part of President Zelensky, which is called the Crimean Platform. It will be presented on the 23rd of August in Kiev for our high-level guests, and we hope that pandemic will let us go further, and of course we'll have the physical normal style as we're used to events in August, late August in Kiev, followed by the first ever forum of the First Ladies and Gentlemen, which is presented by the First Lady of Ukraine, Mrs. Olena Zelensky, and also other side events, which will be followed with different presentations, different high-level meetings. And this is important in diplomacy to keep this track not only online, but of course physical contact, B2B contact, which is so important to discuss some very special, some sensitive issues. And we're very much looking forward, as I have already mentioned, and we're preparing, this is on everyday base, our work. So after we will follow with few more, hopefully, visits of high-level guests after August session. Also the 85 years of Babi Yar. We expect to have high-level guests as well from Switzerland. I have to admit that Switzerland is very much engaged in different initiatives and events that are presented by Ukraine on different levels. The respectful voice of Switzerland and official Bern is always heard by our partners on different platforms, like in OCE in Vienna, or in United Nations in New York, or other capitals like Geneva for United Nations organization and sub-organizations. So as we see, the year 2020 was very fruitful, and we expect 2021 to be also very dynamic. Just few more words to say that during the visit and during 2020, a new cooperation program between Ukraine and Switzerland was actually started for 2020-23. This is adaptation of over 100 million Swiss francs, which is focused on 20 different projects in different spheres of life and different spheres and areas of Ukraine, which is a big support, especially for Donbas region. One of the biggest projects, it's called the Donbas Water, which is important for both parts and temporarily occupied territory where still Ukrainians live. And actually Switzerland is the only country that delivers humanitarian aid to this part of Ukraine. And also very urgent issues are solved in assistance with our Swiss partners, and we're very much thankful to that. And we're together creating and working on such projects. Another few more important missions, it's to hold the political consultations, which take place every 2 years. Actually, they were planned to be held in Kyiv beginning of April this year, but because of the pandemic situation, we have postponed it for later in the first half of the 2021. And another important event, this is the 13th meeting of the joint Swiss-Ukrainian Economical Commission, which take place also every 2 years. We switch the host country every 2 years, and this time it's also Kyiv to be a host city for this meeting, followed by the business forum on the next day. So as you see, the agenda is very active, and which means that we have a lot of homework and a lot of preparations to take place. So briefly, but about most important bilateral focus of our bilateral relations. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Honorary Ambassador, for your deep insight on these bilateral relations. Let's move on to the evaluation of the current state of the Ukraine-Swiss relations, especially from the business perspective. Mr. Sidenko, are you still been with us?
Of course.
Great. So the question for you is, how would you evaluate the current state of the relations between Ukraine and Switzerland in the business context, as a person who is directly involved in that?
You know, we have situation in which we are speaking about relations between Ukraine and Switzerland, when Switzerland is not a part of European Union. It's independent economy, which still is I think in 2020 moved from 5th place on 4th place as investors to Ukraine. So Switzerland is the 4th biggest investor in Ukrainian economy, but it's of course still very low amount of investment which are not correspond to the sizes of Ukrainian economy and Swiss economy. What I mean, if we are talking about economy of Switzerland, it represents more than 600,000 companies. 95% of these companies, it's mostly local family businesses, which are not common model for Ukraine. And it means that it's running and have concept of local Swiss directors, local Swiss owners, who is generally don't know about Ukraine nothing, then just name and then just from news from the last 5 years and news about Ukraine is what? It's war with Russia. This country is post-Soviet Union country, somewhere after the Poland, between Poland and Russia. And of course, when we are speaking about investments in Ukraine and about turnover of goods between Swiss and Ukraine, we can say it's big, but maybe it's only 1 or 2% of potential which can be between our country. And our main aim for the next several years is to increase this, to open for real Swiss business. When I say real Swiss business, I mean not international company who have headquarters in Switzerland, like Nestle or Philip Morris, but for 100% owned by Swiss interpreter and Swiss owner companies who is searching now the possibilities to relocate production, for example, from China to Europe, to make these logistic chains a little bit shorter, who already running some project in Hungary, Poland, or our neighbors Czech and Slovakia. Sorry for it's German pronunciation, but it's a little bit.
That's okay. That's fine.
It's a little bit hard for me to switch because I'm representing the German-speaking part of Switzerland, and we are using these names here. So, from perspective, we need to grow up a lot. I think the potential we can grow up minimum 10 or 20 times more than we have now. And of course, just one example. For 1 year, only in summer 2020, we met with the biggest federation of small and medium enterprises of Switzerland. We met with the board of this federation, and the people who generally in charge for implementation of economical politic in Switzerland was even have no information of the need to have visa or not to fly to Ukraine. And this show us how much information we need to provide on this market to let them know that generally they have a big, great opportunity to expand their businesses in Ukraine. Now, together with our embassy, together with economy of Ministry of Economy, together with Ukrainian West and other government offices, we of course changed it. So we are now on the way. I think this year will give us a huge opportunity to use in this platform 30 years of independence of Ukraine to share more information, but we just on the start of this road. I think we can say that we now only on 1% of power between our economy. Thank you.
Sounds impressive. Thank you for such an insight. My next question is pointed to Mr. Karvatsky, and it's most similar to the previous two. So can you shortly evaluate the current state of the relations between Ukraine and Switzerland from the point of view of the analytical institutions, of the research institutions. How do they, from the Ukraine, see this current state of the relations? The floor is yours.
Yes, thanks, Mr. Artur, for such a question. Thanks to Mr. Artem and Mr. Dmytro for their thoughts about this matter, because I think that the development of relations with any country, including Switzerland, should be conducted in a way involving various stakeholders to make a so-called synergy. It was impossible to develop the relation only with governmental institutions or with business institutions. And the more it will be the line of communication, interaction on this level of civil societies, on the level of research institution, culture, economic, energy, political, etc., the more added value our bilateral relations may bring in future. So as regarding for your question, I have spoken, recently I had a conversation with a Swiss research institution, Avenir Swiss. So we have discussed some points on how to move forward, the quality of our relations. We have discussed the decentralization. In particular, on this, I would like to focus my speech. First of all, I would like to inform and remind all the Ukrainian-speaking audience and on the web page of think tank ADASTRA. So you write in Google think tank ADASTRA or adastra.org.ua. You will see the article written by our expert on development, prospects for development of Ukraine-Swiss relations. We hope that in no time, within the next days, it will be republished in English, in Swiss-speaking media or English-speaking media, so that the more broader audience from the Swiss Confederation could also get aware of the ideas expressed by our experts in this particular piece. So if we look at the relations between Bern and between Kiev as a whole, I personally see a little disproportion, because the Swiss Confederation is taking too much, not too much, it's never too much, taking a lot of steps to help Ukraine develop democratic institutions, to help, so for example, initiate the reforms concerning the decentralization, concerning the defendants against Russian aggression, and we would much appreciate the fact that the Swiss Confederation would join and adhere to Crimea platform in order to remain and to show its willingness to support Ukraine also on this platform. But as a whole, there are also many more areas in which we may cooperate, on which perform better cooperation, which I would like to concentrate my speech, but not to forget, when we are developing this particular piece, and when we are preparing the discussion, I have spoken with our research director. He's originally from Vinnytsia. Vinnytsia, it's a Ukrainian city, and he said to me, you know what? So the Switzerland have given the trolleys from Zurich to Vinnytsia, and you know, this kind of a soft power, it's actually a big deal, because it ameliorates the public image, and like here, and I guess many more citizens living in Vinnytsia know about this fact and have more positive understanding of what the Swiss Confederation is. Regarding the possible spheres of cooperation, I would like to underline the further ones. So the first one is culture. Because, you know, in Basel University in Switzerland, there is a research program devoted to Ukrainian studies, and I see no obstacles why prominent Ukrainian universities like Ripchenko University or National University of Mohila Academy may also implement such kind of studies. It would be also a point for further research cooperation between institutions and between universities. So we need to install Ukraine-Swiss cyberdialogue, because in order to exchange information about the threats, about the ways to limit the threats or the ways to erase the threats, because Ukraine is under constant pressure of Russian aggression, and we have the experience to share Also, the Bern may be a good example for Kiev when it comes to digitalization. As you know, Ukraine has been active on this track since 2019, when our Ministry for Digitalization and the Vice Premier Minister, Mr. Fedorov, was designed to act in its quality to promote digitalization. This is also a point where we can share experience. There are also numerous stuff in scientific, educational cooperation, environmental protection, and so on. Because if we look at the many world indicators when it comes to corruption, when it intolerance, when it comes to environmental protection, when it comes to the freedom of speech, Swiss ratings are among the highest ones. Ukraine has a lot to take from the Swiss Confederation. But when it comes also what the Swiss Confederation can take from Ukraine, I would like to emphasize the cooperation in energy sphere. Because you know, after 2017, the Swiss Confederation held a referendum whether to expand the scope and expand the living cycle on nuclear power plants. The answer was no, and Ukraine is the perfect playground for that, because Ukraine with France are the top European producers of nuclear energy. In Ukraine, 52% of energy is generated due to nuclear power plants. That's why the Swiss specialists may take more experience with dealing with these nuclear power plants who are going beyond their expiry rate. So in this case, it may be one point. The second point may be the investment cooperation, because when we see, for example, the solar energy in Ukraine, we know that the level of radiation is so high, yeah? And when it comes to Swiss Confederation, unfortunately, the level of solar energy is very low. It's lower than 1%. But again, it's also about the investments and about the taking the experience, not to speak about the hydrogen. So hydrogen is the fuel and the energy of tomorrow. So yesterday our think tank has held a discussion on gas geopolitics, and we have a speaker from Ukrainian gas transmission system, and he told us about the prospects of hydrogen, about that hydrogen is a new oil. So in that point, as Ukraine was chosen by European Commission and European Union as a partner country for European hydrogen strategy, hydrogen energy may be one more point for cooperation. So about to take experience, about to understand how does it goes, and about the money, because investments are not just made they're not donations. So yeah, Swiss Republic makes a lot of donations. We are much appreciate this fact, but my crucial point is, key point is that we should also develop our B2B level, the level of cooperation between research institutions, between universities, between civil societies, between maybe some particular regions, because in Ukraine, you know, the municipality play a huge role after the decentralization reform. Yeah, from Ukrainian side, it forces us to build stronger and more resilient democratic institutions, develop corruption intolerance, develop the mechanism for protection of foreign direct investments. And I guess if we adhere to this way of thinking and develop the concrete steps to be taken in different realms, I guess that the relations between Bern and between Kiev can be brought to another quantitative new level of relations. Yes. So I guess it is what I wanted to say right now.
Thank you, Mr. Karvatsky, for your commentary on this. I would like to ask Mr. Honorary Ambassador about his take on something what Mr. Karvatsky said about these possible tracks of the future cooperation in the opinion of the research institutions in Ukraine. Do you think that it is possible? Do you think that it is real? Because you understand the actual state of the relations from the inside out really better, because you are working currently in that field at the moment. So maybe you can give us a little of evaluation on the points that you heard from Mr. Karvatsky.
Thank you. Indeed, this is an interesting and actually very on-time topic. Why? Because as we see, climate issue and other science technologies, modern issues are on top of the page of most of countries' policies. And just last year, it was late June 2020, I personally, on behalf of Minister of Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, have signed a memorandum on cooperation with the Minister of Switzerland, Minister Cassis, concerning cooperation in science diplomacy. And this is a great platform and the mechanism which we can use to really create common projects in science, and not only science. Science diplomacy, it really covers a lot of issues. Everything depends on how we create and how we bring up the position of our cooperation. Also, as an example, last year in this not an easy period of COVID disease, you remember there was a big lack of lung ventilators in the world, and actually two scientists, engineers, teams from both countries worked together, two countries, I mean Ukraine and Switzerland, and a very fantastic, very important project was brought up, which is called the modern lung ventilator system. And nowadays, so Switzerland has actually financially also supported the project, and today we're building the common production line of which will be very in time on not only from pandemic but also for the future cooperation for other countries. So this is an example where Switzerland and Ukraine have really created a product, a common product, and all the capabilities what Ukraine has. I mean, people don't know in the world, and we have to remind that Ukraine is just around the corner from Europe, from our partners, with great possibilities, with really smart, bright people, with also great young people and their possibilities, especially in IT sector, but also science. We can always bring together IT, science, or also to remind that Ukraine is famous for, as we call it, brains and grains. Yes, so brains, it's for IT, ICT sector, and grains for agro sector. This is two main locomotives of our economy. And when this is about combination, and sometimes people don't really understand how we can combine, but actually this is the best time nowadays to really bring in new products and to bring in something new, because Ukraine is really a modern country with a lot of possibilities, and this has to be on top of the page in everyday work. And this is, I really want to ask all participants of today's event and just to think how we can be useful for Ukraine, how can we be useful for our image, how can we bring up ideas, knowledge, and so on and so on. And our embassy here in Bern, we're open to discuss, open to bring the position. Please always any ideas can be forwarded to our official email, to my Facebook, just the same how we got to know with Viktor. He wrote to me on the Facebook and we just got together along, and then we came up with the idea to have this Zoom conference today. So we have to be really flexible to try avoid this old-fashioned style of work between state and NGOs, state and people. So this is also about public diplomacy. Also, it was mentioned about our Vice Prime Minister, Mikhailo Fedorov. I'm proud and happy that actually Mr. Fedorov is the co-chair of the Ukrainian part of the Swiss-Ukrainian Economical Commission. So he is the leading person from our part, and of course, for my great knowledge, will focus on IT sector for the meeting I have already informed you about. So, I mean, it's an everyday work. As we know, if you want to reach and achieve something, you have to work on an everyday basis because your partners see the result. You and your team sees the result. But if you want to reach something, it has to be teamwork. Now, I'm not talking about only teamwork here at the embassy. I'm talking about the society, the chain of people that really bring up the ideas and realize them into something great. Thank you.
Thank you for your response. Well, actually, we have just 2 questions left, as your previous responses were very insightful and deep and very well detailed. So we will focus on the public diplomacy vector that was mentioned. So the first little element of this concept is the cooperation between the media institutions, and it was mentioned in Mr. Karvatsky's response. So this is the question actually for 2 of our speakers, Mr. Karvatsky and Mr. Honorary Ambassador. So can you please name the exact formats of the cooperation between the Ukrainian and Swiss media institutions? Because it's especially interesting for me as for the expert in the international information, and I would like to hear your ideas on that cooperation and on something what can be achieved in the framework of this cooperation. I think that Mr. Karvatsky may start the conversation, and later I will ask the Honorary Ambassador the same question with the follow-up. So Mr. Karvatsky, the floor is yours.
Yes, 6 out of your question. First of all, we need to understand that this is a huge scope of opportunities because we are living in the internet world. We are holding this conference online, and we are living in the pandemic world, which has further fueled the digitalization of our world. The numerous possibilities are numerous. So our think tank cooperates with many Ukrainian media. It's a radio station, national radio station, Ukrainian radio, and the head of Ukrainian radio, Mr. Horkin, was also a member of one of our discussions on the draft media law. Cooperate with TV channels, cooperate with foreign media, like Ripchenko, the leading foreign media in Poland, some media, so and with French journalists affiliated with several media, like Media Courrier d'Europe Centrale and France also. We cooperate with them, and I think that there is a room for the further cooperation. So I personally know the representatives of the LOTAM say the most important media, or one of the most popular media in the Swiss Confederation, as far as I know, is Mr. Emmanuel, and we have also started to cooperate with him. It all starts with some little comments, you know, because the first thing it's about the understanding what is going on. As Mr. Dmytro said in his speech, Ukraine should be understood as something more than just war, Crimea, Russian aggression, Chernobyl, and some many problems. Because yeah, we have many problems fueled by Russian aggression, but we take the opportunity to think beyond that, to develop our country. That's why I guess that the cooperation may start with some small stuff like commentaries, joint articles like this, because if you read Ukrainian media, you won't hardly find an article from French side, from German side, from England, from British side, or from Poland side. Yeah, so it's about the small steps taken and developing into something more, into special projects, into informational partnership, and maybe in some joint grant application aimed within the scope of Ukrainian Institute or within like Open Ukraine, something like this. But I think that the impetus may be found, and it's definitely easy to find a counter-agent. As I said, I have written to the honorary ambassador on Facebook. I have written to the Mr. Emmanuel from Rotam also on Facebook, and the world is interconnected. The thing is a desire to make something. And the main stakeholders, more stakeholders we engage in this process, other think tanks, other scientific institution, business association, etc., the more the information about such possibilities will be circulating in the media, the greater outcomes we will see. Because I think the people are not friendly about it, are not afraid of something new, but one should send them a clear message that there is a possibility, it's possible, all you can do is to seize it. And once the synergy of the stakeholders makes it and brings like the Switzerland into Ukrainian media space, I guess it's all is possible. It's just a question of efforts, and I don't think that something is impossible. So as I said, world is interconnected, people are open, we're living in a social media age, and all projects may be made online, and I don't think this is a big deal. So maybe 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it would be impossible to envisage something like this. But now, you know, with the existence of such a term as Twitter diplomacy, why it's impossible to cooperate with media on Twitter? Yeah, thanks.
Thank you for your commentary on that. I hope that the Ukrainian media heard that opinion and they're ready to take action on that. Mr. Honorary Ambassador, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, thank you once again for giving me the floor. As Viktor has mentioned, indeed, today we have transformation of classical media more deeply into updated modern style of passing information. Beginning of this year, late January, I have finished and completed my PhD on digital diplomacy. And of course, this is my everyday work, and it has changed a lot since especially COVID time. But I can say that in any case, there are pluses and minuses. In running if we compare a classical type of bringing information by newspapers, printed media, let's say radio and television, or some social media and online platforms, always plus and minus to be faster or to be more by protocol if you talk about diplomatic way of cooperation and so on and so on. But what is important? No matter how you bring information, important what you bring. In the world of fake news, in the world and time of fake news, in the world and time of cyber attacks, and all this, especially our country knows it very well on the ground, disinformation from our neighbor as a Russian Federation, we really understand how it is important to bring not only the truth and fast information, it's always important to balance information. And if we talk about Swiss media, frankly speaking, you find more information about war in Donbass, East Ukraine, Crimean issue, not as much, and that's why the Crimean platform is one of the initiatives of our president to remind the world, remind our partners that there is a problem of Crimea, that Crimean Tatars are hurt, that people are kidnapped, that human rights are not supported by the international law and standards. If we talk about Crimea, also corruption issue, unfortunately, is still a case, and we're not really hiding from it. We're working hard to really get over this disease of our country. And at the same time, we have to bring in positive about our country. And it's not only about economy, it's not only about politics. It's also about our culture, about our traditions. It's about our music, sport, Ukrainian cousin, and so on and so on. So this is when I talk and when I ask colleagues and partners to participate in this. This means that we as an embassy, we can use our official channels to bring the information, but it would probably be more about official standards. And when we know our partners from who is a singer in the Swiss opera, or he's a sportsman and presents Ukraine, but he's training here in Switzerland, he can use this channel because we're all ambassadors in different spheres of life. This is also a channel, maybe not a classical media channel, but you bring the Ukrainian position, you bring the image, and this is once again return what is the public diplomacy. Just this week, a new handbook, cultural diplomacy, was presented. Of course, we have discussed also these channels, how to bring the position, how to bring the image, and what are the aim of our country. And our aim is to keep our country independent sooner, to keep our partners really voting and supporting us on different platforms. And of course, this will be done when we Ukrainians work hard on everyday basis in different spheres, in different locations, back in Kyiv, here in Brno, any other city in the world, just to talk straight to our partners. Thank you.
Well, thank you for the insight. We'll have our final question for today. Again, for both of you, you already mentioned it very vaguely and slightly, but let's talk about this on a wider scale. And we will talk about the cultural cooperation between Switzerland and Ukraine. So maybe Mr. Karvatsky may start this conversation. What are the exact formats and opportunities that are possible in the development of the cultural relations between these two states?
Well, thanks for the question, Artur. The cultural diplomacy is actually a great stuff. The area to be explored further. As I mentioned before, we have published our recommendation of our fellow, and she recommends, and I support this idea of conducting, for example, a year of Swiss culture in Ukraine or Ukrainian culture in Switzerland. As we know, the French Institute Français, makes the stuff like this very regularly. The festivals of the French French films, French singers, etc., etc., etc. These are the steps that we can take from our side and implement within the scope of Kyiv relations. You don't need to underestimate the value of cultural diplomacy. You know the K-pop. What is K-pop? K-pop is a Korean pop with some guys singing and conquering the world. So K-pop is used in Korea as a weapon for public diplomacy. They are conquering the Asian, Southeast Asian, so as an organization of ASEAN, they are conquering the South Asian world. And that's why it should be never neglected as something. Yeah, there's a huge scope starting from the festivals, meetings, culture exchange in universities, singers, films, videos, TikTok challenge, yeah, our organization has also a TikTok, and so TikTok challenge makes also an impact. I guess the best possibilities do exist, and the aim is to seize them. Yeah, cultural diplomacy may take various forms. The most important thing is just to prioritize it, to find the partners, find contact agents, and then on different level, on regional, on national wise, different social media and different forms, it may take place. Because I should stress once again, one should never underestimate the value of cultural diplomacy. Yeah.
Thank you for that insight. And the final word of all of the speakers of today will belong to Mr. Ripchenko, Mr. Honorary Ambassador. You've already mentioned some possible formats and opportunities of the cultural cooperation between Ukraine and Switzerland. Can you elaborate on that and add something new to Mr. Karvatsky's opinion on that?
Thank you. Indeed, this is a new track for the foreign policy, which is very important. And our Minister Foreign Affairs of Ukraine, Mr. Kuleba, dedicates a lot of attention to this issue. At the ministry, first deputy of our minister, Mrs. Japarova, is responsible for the track. And really, I must admit that in the last few years, the cultural campaigns have really become strong, interesting, and modern. And this is not just my opinion. This is what I get as feedbacks from our partners. Being here in Bern, I represent Ukraine, first of all, of course, to Switzerland and to Swiss people. But at the same time, especially before the lockdown and before the pandemic because of the COVID, you present your country to your partners who come and accredit in this capital. So actually, this is not only about Swiss-Ukrainian relations, it's about Ukraine and the whole world presented here in Switzerland. That's why you always have to use this chance and to bring up, the best of the best positions using different mechanisms. Also important, talking about Switzerland, we have to remember this is Confederation with 4 official languages, with very different cultures, and we have to, just for your understanding, if you come to Ticino, the Italian-speaking part of Switzerland, at some point you really forget that you're in Switzerland because of the culture. All people speak Italian. You feel yourself in Italy till the time as you have to pay in Swiss francs. This is always what I hear from tourists or from people who come to Switzerland. And the same way around, if you go to the German-speaking part or French-speaking part. So also you have to, to bring something on the right track to your partners, to the right location, the right time. And this is what we do, actually. This is our job. This is our work. And once again, just a few weeks ago, I had an online meeting with our Ukrainians who live and work here in Switzerland to really bring up the campaign to inform and to send best messages, best images of our country to the partners. So this is how it works, actually.
So yeah, thank you for your commentary. Well, that was the last question of our conversation. First of all, thanks to all of our speakers for your active participation and for your thoughts on the future of the Ukrainian-Swiss relations. Also, to those who missed this conversation, you can look it up after it's finished on our Facebook page and on other social outlets of ADASTRA think tank. Also, thanks to the Embassy of Ukraine in Switzerland, we hope that we'll have an active and fruitful cooperation in the future, and we are ready to take part in the similar future events from our side. I hope that this discussion sparked an interest in Ukrainians and citizens of the Swiss Confederation and people from all around the world in the future of the bilateral relations between Ukraine and Switzerland. I was very glad to moderate this panel discussion. So today we talked about the 30th anniversary of the Swiss-Ukrainian relations and their future prospects. And today we had these incredible speakers. Mr. Artem Rybchenko, Ambassador of Ukraine to the Swiss Confederation. Thank you one more time for your participation. Mr. Dmytro Sidenko, President of the Ukraine-Swiss Business Association, and Mr. Viktor Karvatsky, the CEO of ADASTRA think tank from Kyiv, Ukraine. And I am Artur Koldomasov, the Senior Fellow of the ADASTRA think tank. And thank you for your participation in the conversation, and hope to see you on our social media and on our future events. And furthermore, read our new article in Ukrainian language about the future of the Ukrainian-Swiss relationship on our official web page to get a deeper insight on the topic of today's conversation. So it will be available in the foreign media outlets in English. Thank you one more time. Have a nice day, and see you on our future events once again.